Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I hope everything is good wherever you are in the world. Daquan Lawrence here with the Freedom Fighters of the DMV. As you see, Mr. Shafi is not here this evening. He has some very important business to attend to, so I am here trying to hold it down for our international community. I have a couple of news stories that I would like to share with you real quick. Mainly focusing on the Washington, D.C. and DMV area, primarily focusing on youth, as I am a young adult who is quickly entering the non-young adult or middle ages of my life. I focus on youth issues. Some of you may or may not remember that I participated in the show last week. Once again, my name is Daquan Lawrence. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at the Mecca Howard University in Washington, D.C., currently studying African studies, public policy, and global development. But what I do in my spare time, when I'm not researching, when I'm not trying to learn how to solve social issues and become a social scientist that I believe that I am, like those before me, I work 9 to 5 as a public school teacher. And I also work as a part-time freelance journalist. So working in that journalist capacity, that gives me a lot of time to work and view things that are going on in our international society from a holistic standpoint. And that's what brings me to you today. So before we share, I share some of those stories really quickly. I believe, if possible, I would like to share one of my interventions of the many hats that I wear. I also participate in what is known as the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. That is the UNPFPAD. That's the acronym. The Permanent Forum for People of African Descent is the largest platform in the world for brown people that look like me, people who may identify as African American, African descendants, brown people from all over the world, for us to advocate for human rights at the United Nations, for us to advocate for justice for injustices such as the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, racism in its modern form, racialism. Historically, as people who may or may not know, that race is a social construct. I mean, it's not real. Race being a social construct, we now deal with modern derivations of race, which lead to many problems. So that being said, one of the things that I like to do is go to the United Nations and again advocate for people all over the world. I think we have one of my speeches that we're going to air really quickly. And after that, I will share the news, which will hopefully be uplifting, insightful, and empowering. And then I will bid you adieu, wherever you may be. So 1 second really quickly as we get that lined up. Sure. All right, let me share this. And is my audio is ready? Can I just let me know when I can play it? All right, 1 second. Starting right now.
Give the floor to Lawrence Daquan, Civil Society Working Group. Lawrence.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, ancestors. I would just like to read a quote before I give my remarks. Without justice, there is no dignity, and without independence, there are no free men or women. Neither brutal assaults, nor cruel mistreatment, nor torture have ever led me to beg for mercy, for I prefer to die with my head held high, unshakable faith, and the greatest confidence in the destiny of my country rather than live in slavery and contempt for sacred principles. History will one day have its say. It will not be the history taught at the United Nations. It will not be the history taught in Washington, Paris, Brussels, however, but the history taught in the countries that have rid themselves of colonialism and its puppets. Africa will write its own history, and both the north and south of the Sahara, it will be a history full of glory and dignity. Rest in peace, Patrice Lumumba. It's important for me to begin with the assassinated Congolese leader Patrice Lumumba because his murder is known as the first United Nations peacekeeping mission. Unfortunately, 62 years later, we are now here asking for United Nations and former colonial governments to finally acknowledge our humanity. It seems that many of our ancestors accomplished more with less, and due to this apparent fact, I'm still trying to figure out
what Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Winnie Mandela, Ella Jo Baker, Claudia Jones, and others would have did with the internet? Can we finally set the record straight? Whereas Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle learned at the feet of Africans, Westphalian states such as the United States, United Kingdom, France, and others used the tools created by enslaved and colonized individuals, and the world continues to benefit from the effort, spirituality, sexuality, ingenuity, resilience, and labor of African women, children, and men. As Franz Fanon and many others pointed out, white settler colonialism is not merely about land. It is more about mind control. We need to decolonize every institution as well as ourselves if we truly seek to respect and protect the human rights of people of African descent. Although the continent was nominally decolonized, neoliberalism is rampant around the world, which maintains the racial hierarchical order that is purely based on social constructions. Gender, race, and even the notion of time are all social constructs that have been imposed on Africans over the last several centuries. Sovereignty and economic development go hand in hand, similar to how U.S. slavery and colonialism in Africa worked in concert to strip us of our spirituality, families, and natural self-determination. Will advocating for the human rights of Africans be sufficient in a world where the World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, and other Bretton Woods institutions don't allow African states to set the terms of the sale of their own global products? Importing refined agricultural products while businesses in former colonial states profit and own manufacturing companies are a few examples. It's important that we hold ourselves accountable as institutions so we are not merely engaging in performative stage play and political theater. Rhetoric about Pan-Africanism is baseless if we view ourselves through the colonial paradigm of inferiority.
Thank you.
As Amilcar Cabral introduced the notion of class suicide, it's more relevant for us to help our brothers, sisters, and everyone today by removing our superiority complex that we subscribe to. I have a lot more to say, but thank you for your time.
So thank you all for bearing with us. My apologies that I did not send our producers the visual so you could see the entire video. But I just wanted to start there because, again, there's a lot to be said. But as we know, again, time is of the essence. As a person of African descent, that is also a researcher, that is also interested in social science, that is also interested in human rights. There are many things that we could say that have been said historically and contemporaneously about the status quo. However, instead of using data to make arguments to tear, people down, I believe that we should just look in the mirror. Should we look in the mirror as a community, we'll find that there are plenty of things that we could do ourselves to get our affairs straight. And then once we're all on the same page, it doesn't mean that we will all agree. Okay, it doesn't mean that we will all agree. We have, it's not a monolith within the Black community, right? So we know between generations, different people have mentalities. Between religions, different people have different mentalities. Between geography, different people have different mentalities. And obviously education and occupation, right? So there are many different social, political, and economic variants that separate African people or people of African descent, right? However, we can still be on code. Being on code means we can all defend each other no matter how much money one makes or one doesn't make. Because if we want to talk about quote unquote other side, or if we want to talk about race, if we want to do racial politics, if we want to do identity politics, I assure you that the richest or the wealthiest person of any group, marginalized or not marginalized, they should agree and be on the same code. Meaning, the richest white person, the most wealthiest white person, and the poorest white person, they are on code. They agree when it comes to racism. They do not believe that anybody is better than them. I believe, again, that brown people should be doing something similar. We should not be ostracizing each other based on based on political, social, or economic status, based on religious differences, based on social differences, based on economic differences, okay? So that being said, if one could fathom that, if we could shift to that paradigm, I think there'll be a lot of things that we could do. So before we go, let's get into the news really quickly, okay? I'm done preaching. I'm done, giving you this spiritual experience where I pacify you about human rights. So the first story that I want to talk about comes from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser has decided to expand the youth curfew with an eye to public safety. Again, this is very important. As for those who live in the DMV, particularly the District of Columbia or in that area, or who may travel in and out of the district, there have been several instances where more recently within the last, I could say 3 to 5 years, where youth have been either sought, identified, or held accountable for their transgressions, right? Oftentimes, again, youth can be perceived as being throwaways or juveniles or delinquents if they get involved into crime-related activities. However, children are still children and they are not throwaways. That's my perspective. So again, from a journalistic capacity, I covered that in an effort to improve public safety and prevent an increase in youth-involved crimes, the District of Columbia recently announced a short-term expansion of the youth curfew. On July 7th, Mayor Bowser released a public statement via Facebook declaring the intent of the law. Last month, before this law became official, Mayor Bowser actually advocated for the Juvenile Curfew Emergency Amendment Act of 2025. That was then taken to the DC Council's legislative meeting that happened on July 1st, and it was approved. Changes that are brought by this legislation include, but are not limited to, the following: adjusting the juvenile curfew hours to 11 p.m. during the months of July and August. This is particularly important because there seems to be a regionalized approach to this, where certain neighborhoods have flexible curfews that can be enforced arbitrarily or moved up to 8 p.m., while other areas of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan area that are more commercial, might have more business activities, they will have their curfews. Those will either, again, be pushed earlier or they'll be moved later into the day, depending on, I guess, the whim of the D.C. officials. Other changes brought by this legislation include extending the applicability of the juvenile curfew to 17-year-olds. I believe 17-year-olds were excluded before. This legislation also authorizes the chief of police to establish a juvenile curfew zone. This will mirror the parameters of the popular drug-free curfew zone or drug-free zones of the Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, that were brought about by the Secure D.C. Omnibus Bill that was signed by Mayor Bowser in March 2014. And last but not least, the new curfew, or as it's officially called, the Juvenile Curfew Emergency Amendment Act of 2025, also allows the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, or ANC, and the Business Improvement District, or a Main Street organization, to petition the chief of police to establish an extended juvenile curfew hour zone. So again, this legislation pretty much gives MPD as well as the city officials and governing stakeholders, I would say, more leeway or flexibility with enforcing curfews in certain segments of the city. Again, depending on who you are, you may think about one way or another about that. From what my vantage point, again, I think that youth should not be criminalized. Youth should not be criminalized en masse. And this particularly, again, deals with youth who may be involved in the criminal justice or criminal injustice system, again, depending on how you feel about that. The next story, which is tangentially related to that topic, is a story about the Washington, D.C. identifying a need for a new jail in the District of Columbia. So again, our first story talked about the juvenile the Juvenile Curfew Emergency Amendment Act. The second story is more so focused on the need for new jails. This again deals with all populations. For those of you who may not have known or heard, Washington, D.C. currently has two facilities that are responsible for housing offenders or inmates. The Department of Corrections is located in Northwest D.C., and the Department of Corrections is responsible for administering the Central Detention Facility, which is the CDF, as well as the facility that houses women or female inmates within the city. The Central Detention Facility opened in 1976, while the latter jail for women inmates was opened much later. So both facilities have actually been identified for having overcrowding. More specifically, the Office of the District of Columbia Auditor completed a report about 5 years or 6 years after the previous report, which was filed in 2019, which identified deteriorating conditions at the current jail, a current report stating that there are in-custody deaths, staffing issues, health and safety concerns, as well as mental health and substance abuse challenges. So these issues, again, have been rampant for at least, I would say, the last 4 decades. These issues are not new. However, they are still plaguing the current jail within the nation's capital. Based on the findings, the current jail is also again facing issues of overcrowding. Recent figures from fiscal year 2024 show that of the 7,508 people who were admitted, the median length of stay was 168 days for males, while the median length of stay was 59 days for females. So again, these things are issues that affect everybody within our community, whether we are committing crimes or whether we are not committing crimes. And I think, again, it is very important that we identify them and we try to work together to ameliorate these situations. That being said, the last story that I want to talk about also deals with the same population involved, again, in criminal justice issues, but particularly, again, focusing on the youth. There's a story that was recently published, literally the top of this week, focusing on supporting youth returning from DC correctional facilities. Again, this is the third story that I wrote, which I believe, again, also speaks to these populations. And before I let you all go on this lovely evening, I just want to talk to you about why this is important, and again, things that we can do to change this. Destiny, you need to get off that. You need to stop that. The name, you need to get off of it. Supporting youth returning from DC correctional facilities. Although there was a 75% decline in national youth incarceration between 2000 and 2022, you need to get off of it. Turn it off. Although there was a 75% decline in national youth incarceration between 2000 and 2022, at the end of 2022, there were about 27,000 youth offenders held inside of juvenile facilities across the nation, including detention centers, residential treatment centers, group homes, and youth prisons. Considering the high amounts of youth involved in the justice system, it is important for stakeholders around the district to recognize that we can all support youth who are returning from correctional facilities. In Washington, D.C., the Department of Youth and Rehabilitation Services, or DYRS, is responsible for the supervision, custody, and care of people charged with the delinquent act. DYRS works with youth who are committed by a D.C. Superior Court family court judge after adjudication, as well as while they are detained. Again, this is similar to the previous story where there are two primary jails, one for women, another for men within the Washington, D.C. area or within the district proper. There are also two primary facilities that house our youth offenders or youth who are involved in the criminal justice system. One is actually located in the northeast section or quadrant of the city, the Youth Service Center, or YSC. And the second is called the New Beginnings Youth Development Center, which is actually located in Maryland proper in the city or township of Laurel. So the YSC, or the Youth Service Center, is an 88-bed facility that accommodates youth who receive short sentences, while the New Beginnings Youth Development Center is a 60-bed residential facility where youth receive longer-term sentences. According to officials, the youth at both facilities are typically brilliant in one way or another. However, many of them have not figured out how to use their powers for good. So again, I encourage you to look these stories up. If you search my name, Daquan Lawrence, that's DAQUANLAWRENCE, across all platforms, Twitter, Instagram is Dr. Daquan Lawrence, again, as I am a doctoral candidate. On TikTok is DOC, Daquan, Doc Daquan. But yeah, all of these news stories are available, and please, if you're interested, again, in talking more about this, please email us at the WBGR network, or contact Freedom Fighters of the DMV for more information. Again, these are ongoing things. I have this perspective. For those of you who are with us from the beginning of the show, again, you see I do the international advocacy and diplomacy at the United Nations. I am due to receive my doctorate in spring of 2026. So that's about, what's that, 4 and 5 years. So about 9 months from now, maybe 8 to 9 months from now. But again, I'm interested in all things human rights, social stratification, and empowering Black people, particularly here in the DMV and especially all around the world. And again, here goes the news brought to you and the freedom fighters of the DMV. Once again, thank you for joining us. My name is Daquan Lawrence. You can find me again on all socials at Daquan Lawrence. Oh, I forgot to mention YouTube. Very important. YouTube, Dr. Daquan, DRDAQUAN. On YouTube, Dr. Daquan, you can see some of my research. You can see some of the videos that I've made with the greatest students in the world that I've had the privilege of teaching. Some middle schoolers who I love pouring into. So again, with that being said, thank you for your time, and tune in to us next week here on the WBGR TV network, Freedom Fighters of the DMV.